The groan of the wheels was a constant, weary complaint against the rutted track that passed for a road. Inside the stagecoach, Bo Hartley braced himself against the lurching sway, his gaze fixed on the unforgiving landscape of the San Juan Mountains. Dust, thick as flour, seeped through the leather curtains coating his worn duster and settling in the lines of his face. He was coming home, but the word felt hollow, a place on a map, rather than a comfort in his heart. He was returning from a fruitless trip to Durango, an attempt to secure a loan against a future herd that didn't yet exist. The banker, a man with a starched collar and eyes like cold steel, had practically laughed him out of the office. Now all Bo carried was the bitter taste of failure and a dwindling supply of hope. His hand went to his chest, his fingers finding the familiar shape of the silver locket beneath his shirt. It was all he had left of her, of Mary. A small, cool weight against the anxious heat of his skin. The coach crested a rise, the horses straining, and for a moment the world opened up a vast expanse of pine-studded hills and distant, snow-capped peaks. It was beautiful and brutal a land that promised everything and gave nothing for free. He thought of his children, Samuel already too old at 9, Lucy with her mother's hair and a cough that lingered like winter, and little Thomas, who still sometimes woke crying for a woman who would never answer. The weight of his love for them, was a physical ache in his chest. Suddenly, a rifle shot cracked the air, sharp and definitive. The coach jolted to a violent halt, throwing Bo hard against the opposite seat. Shouts erupted from the driver's box, followed by the terrified whinnying of horses. Before Bo could react, the door was wrenched open, and the barrel of a Colt revolver filled the space. "Out," a voice rasped, as cold and sharp as the mountain air. "All of you. Now." Bo complied, his hands raised, his eyes scanning the scene. 3 riders, their faces obscured by dusty bandanas, had them surrounded. The driver and shotgun guard were already on the ground, their hands bound. 2 other passengers, a nervous-looking salesman and a pale, frightened woman, tumbled out beside him. The leader of the gang swung down from his horse. He was taller than the others, moving with a fluid, predatory grace. His eyes, visible above the bandana, were a pale, chilling blue. He didn't waste a motion, directing his men with quiet, precise gestures. They were professionals. This wasn't some drunken impulse. It was a calculated operation. Valuables on the ground, the leader commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. He walked down the line of passengers, his gaze lingering on each of them for a moment, an assessment that was both impersonal and deeply unnerving. When he reached Bo, his eyes narrowed. Bo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the altitude. He dropped his wallet containing the few dollars he had left. The leader ignored it, his eyes fixed on Bo's chest. With a sudden, swift movement, he reached out his gloved fingers, hooking the chain around Bo's neck. No, Bo said the word, a guttural plea. He instinctively grabbed the outlaw's wrist. The man's blue eyes flashed. He didn't struggle. Instead, he calmly drew a second pistol from his belt, its handle inlaid with gleaming silver. He pressed the cold muzzle against Bo's temple. "Let go," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "or your children become orphans." The mention of his children broke Bo's resistance. His hand fell away, limp and useless. The leader gave a sharp tug, and the chain snapped. He held the locket in his gloved palm, flipping it open with his thumb. For a heart-stopping moment, he stared at the tiny, hand-tinted portrait of Mary inside. Bo watched helpless as this stranger, this thief, gazed upon the face of his late wife. The outlaw's posture seemed to shift, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before he snapped the locket shut. He pocketed it. Not with the other stolen goods, but in a separate pocket inside his coat, as if it were something personal. The violation was more profound than any physical blow. He had taken more than a piece of silver. He had stolen a memory, a sacred connection. The leader gestured to one of his men. The man slammed the butt of his rifle into Bo's gut. Bo doubled over, gasping for air, as pain exploded behind his ribs. He collapsed into the dust, the world swimming in a gray haze. He heard the outlaws mount their horses, the thunder of their departure echoing in the canyon. Then silence broken only by the whimpering of the woman and the groaning of the driver. Bo pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. The salesman offered a hand, but Bo ignored it. His gaze was fixed on the empty space where the riders had been. The money didn't matter. The beating didn't matter. All that mattered was the cold, empty space on his chest where the locket used to be. A ruthless man with pale blue eyes and a silver-inlaid pistol now held the last piece of his wife, and with it, the last piece of Bo's heart. The return to the Double H Ranch was a journey through a landscape of failure. Each familiar landmark, the twisted juniper, the dry creek bed, the final rise that overlooked his property, served as a monument to his own inadequacy. When the homestead finally came into view, it offered no comfort. It looked as beaten and weary as he felt. The barn door hung from a single hinge, groaning in the wind like a dying man. The fences sagged their posts, leaning at drunken angles. The cattle he passed were gaunt, their ribs stark as washboards under their winter-thin hides. He had built this place with Mary, their sweat and dreams soaked into the very soil. Now it felt like her tomb, and he was the reluctant groundskeeper. He unhitched the weary horse and led it to the trough, his movements stiff and pained. The front door of the log house creaked open. Samuel stood there, a small, somber silhouette against the dim interior. "Papa." The boy's voice was hesitant, his eyes scanning Bo's bruised face with a worry that was far too old for a 9-year-old. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," son, Bo lied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Just a rough trip." He stepped inside, the familiar scent of wood smoke dust and something else, the faint, cloying scent of sickness closing in around him. The house was a portrait of quiet desperation. A pile of unwashed dishes sat in the dry sink. A half-mended shirt lay abandoned on the table. Through the open door to the children's room, he could hear Lucy's shallow, rasping cough. He walked to her bedside. She lay curled in a nest of rumpled blankets, her small body trembling with each breath. Her blonde hair, so like her mother's, was damp with fever. He laid a hand on her forehead. It was hot, too hot. "Papa," she whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "My chest hurts." "I know, little bird," he murmured, his voice thick. "I know." He turned to see Samuel in the doorway, his small hands gripping a log that was nearly too big for him to carry. He was trying to chop firewood, his face set, with fierce, desperate concentration. Beside him, 3-year-old Thomas watched, his thumb in his mouth, his eyes wide and lost. In that moment, the weight of it all, the failed loan, and the robbery, the stolen locket, Lucy's fever, his son's silent burdens, threatened to crush him. He was failing them. Mary had left them in his care, and he was failing. That night, after a meager supper of burnt beans and stale bread, Bo made his decision. He couldn't do this alone anymore. He wasn't enough. The next morning, he hitched up the wagon. He was going to Mercy's Bend for 2 reasons: to report the robbery to Sheriff Watson and to find help. Any help. Mercy's Bend wasn't a town so much as a stubborn suggestion of one, a single muddy street lined with weather-beaten buildings clinging to the side of the valley. Bo tied the wagon outside the sheriff's office, the ache in his ribs a dull, constant reminder of his loss. Sheriff Watson was a man worn smooth by time and trouble. He listened patiently as Bo recounted the robbery, his expression a mask of weary professionalism. 3 men, you say, the leader with blue eyes and a fancy pistol. Watson sighed, running a hand over his balding head. Sounds like Jedediah Thornton's crew. They've been hitting stages up north. Didn't figure they'd be bold enough to come this far south. He scribbled a few notes, and he took a locket. It was my wife's, Bo said, his voice flat. Watson looked up, his gaze softening with a hint of sympathy. I'm sorry, Bo. I'll put the word out, but men like Thornton, they don't leave tracks. The locket's likely already been melted down or traded for whiskey. Bo nodded, a cold knot tightening in his gut. He knew the sheriff was right, but the finality of it was like a second death. He left the office and walked toward Morrison's general store, the town's bleak reality pressing in on him. As he passed the grain warehouse, a scene of casual cruelty caught his eye. Dan Fletcher, the greasy proprietor of the hotel, had a woman cornered against the rough planked wall. She was thin to the point of gauntness, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the hollows of her eyes. Sheriff Watson was there too, looking on with an air of official impatience. I told you, move along, Fletcher was saying, his voice slick with contempt. We don't need vagrants cluttering up the town. It's bad for business. I'm not a vagrant, the woman replied. Her voice was quiet, but it held a core of steel. I am looking for work. I'll do anything. Cooking, cleaning. What you need is a ticket on the next stage out. Watson interjected, his earlier sympathy for Bo gone. We've got enough of our own to look after. Bo watched his own fresh anger and humiliation from the robbery simmering just below the surface. He saw the woman's dignity, a small flickering flame, in the face of their bullying. Fletcher sneered. Yeah, I heard about you. Clara Mae Thompson, the barren widow from Denver. No wonder your husband's family tossed you out. What use is a woman who can't give a man sons? The woman Clara flinched as if struck, but her chin remained high. I can work, she repeated, her voice steady. That is all I am asking for. Something snapped in Bo. He thought of Lucy's fever, of Samuel's two small hands, of the cold, silent house. He thought of the locket stolen by a man who respected nothing. He was tired of being helpless. He strode forward, his boots sinking into the mud. All three of them turned to look at him, surprised by the interruption. He ignored Fletcher and the sheriff, his eyes on the woman. She looking for work, he asked, his voice a low growl. I've got it. Let her be. The words hung in the air, blunt and final. Fletcher's jaw dropped. The sheriff looked nonplussed. Clara stared at Bo, her dark, weary eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fragile hope. Now wait a minute, Bo Fletcher started. You don't know anything about this woman. What will people say? My wife is 4 months buried, Bo said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable threat. My children need care. This woman needs work. That's my business, not yours. He turned back to Clara. I've got 3 children, a ranch that needs tending, room, board, and wages. You interested? She just nodded, unable to speak. Get your things, Bo commanded. She bent and picked up a small, worn carpet bag, her entire world in a single piece of luggage. As Bo turned and walked back to his wagon, he heard her quick, determined footsteps splashing through the mud behind him. He didn't look back. He'd made a decision driven by desperation and a flash of anger, bringing a complete stranger into the heart of his family. He didn't know if he'd just found a savior or invited in a different kind of trouble. But as the wagon pulled away from the gawking faces of Fletcher and Watson, and the silent, dignified woman settled onto the seat beside him, Bo felt the first flicker of something other than loss. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just the grim determination to survive another day. The first few weeks were a quiet battle of wills, fought not with words, but with the clatter of pots and the scent of baking bread. The Double H ranch house, which had been a shell of grief, slowly began to feel like a home again under Clara's quietly competent hands. The floors were scrubbed, the windows cleaned, and the constant comforting aroma of stew or fresh laundry replaced the stale air of neglect. She moved through the chaos of his life, with a purpose that both soothed and unsettled him. The true front line, however, was Samuel. His eldest son saw Clara not as a helper, but as an invader, an interloper trying to occupy the space his mother had left behind. He treated her with a cold, formal politeness that was more wounding than any childish tantrum. Bo watched his heart aching for both of them as they navigated their silent war. One afternoon, Bo came in from the fields to find the kitchen floor, which Clara had just finished mopping, covered in muddy water. Samuel stood beside the overturned bucket, his face a mask of feigned innocence. "It slipped," he said, not looking at Clara. Clara said nothing. She simply picked up the bucket, refilled it from the pump, and began to mop the floor again, her movements calm and deliberate. Samuel stood watching for a long moment before retreating to his room, his small victory tasting like ash. The next evening at supper, as Clara served a plate of biscuits light and fluffy, in a way Bo hadn't managed in months, Samuel pushed his plate away. "Do you even know how my mama made biscuits?" he challenged, his voice sharp. "She used buttermilk, and she always put a little bacon grease in the pan." Clara paused, the serving spoon in her hand. "No, Samuel, I don't," she said softly, her gaze meeting his without anger. "I'm sure they were wonderful. Perhaps one day you could teach me." The unexpected response disarmed him. He mumbled something unintelligible and sullenly began to eat the biscuit. It was delicious. He hated that it was delicious. Clara never pushed. She never raised her voice or demanded respect. She won it piece by careful piece through actions. She noticed the frayed cuff on his favorite shirt and mended it with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. He said nothing, but he wore the shirt for 3 days straight. She saw him struggling to set a rabbit snare near the creek, and without a word showed him a trapper's knot that was simpler and more effective. The next morning, a fat rabbit was hanging from the snare. The turning point came during a cold snap. Bo was out mending a fence line on the far side of the property when a sudden, frigid rain began to fall. By the time he got back to the house, he was soaked through and shivering, a deep cough rattling his chest. Clara took one look at him and went into action. She sent Samuel for extra blankets and Lucy for hot water, her voice calm but authoritative. She stripped Bo of his wet clothes with an impersonal efficiency and wrapped him in warm blankets, pushing him into a chair by the fire. She made him a hot mustard plaster for his chest, the sharp scent filling the room, and forced a scalding mug of tea and honey into his hands. Samuel watched from the doorway, his face pale with a familiar fear. This was how it had started with his mother. The cough, the fever, the struggle for breath. "He'll be all right, won't he?" he asked Clara, his voice small. Clara looked up from tending the fire. "Yes," she said with a certainty that defied the storm rattling the windows. "He's strong. We just need to get the chill out of his bones." She looked back at Samuel. "Your father needs you to be strong too. Can you do that for him?" Samuel nodded, straightening his small shoulders. For the rest of the evening, he was her shadow, fetching firewood, checking on his father, and reading quietly by the hearth. He saw not a replacement for his mother, but an ally. Late that night, long after the younger children were asleep, Clara was sitting by the fire, keeping watch. Bo was asleep in the chair, his breathing finally even. She heard a floorboard creak and turned to see Samuel standing there, holding out a small carved wooden bird. "My mama helped me make this," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. She liked birds." Clara took the bird, her fingers tracing the rough-hewn wings. It's beautiful, Samuel. I thought if I liked you, it meant I was forgetting her. He confessed the words tumbling out in a rush. But that's not it, is it? It's just different now. It's very different, Clara agreed, her heart aching for him. But you will never forget your mother. Loving someone new doesn't take away the love you had before. It just makes your heart bigger. He looked at her, his 9-year-old eyes filled with a grief too heavy for him to carry alone. He took a hesitant step forward, and for the first time, leaned against her. Clara wrapped an arm around his trembling shoulders, holding him close. The war was over. In the warm, fire-lit room with the storm raging outside and his father sleeping safely nearby, Samuel had finally surrendered. As spring deepened into summer, a fragile peace settled over the Double H. The days grew longer, filled with the hard work of planting and branding. But the evenings became a quiet sanctuary. After the children were asleep, Bo and Clara would often find themselves on the porch, the silence between them as comfortable as a well-worn blanket. They rarely spoke of personal matters. They discussed the price of cattle, the need for rain, or a funny thing Thomas had said at supper. But in these shared moments, under a vast canopy of stars, something deeper was taking root. Bo found himself watching the way the moonlight caught in her dark hair, or the small, tired smile that touched her lips when she thought he wasn't looking. He was beginning to see the woman behind the quiet competence, the strength forged in fires he couldn't imagine. The outside world, however, refused to leave them in peace. Sheriff Watson rode out one afternoon ostensibly to check on a stray calf, but Bo knew it was an excuse. "Any more news on that robbery?" Bo asked, leaning against a fence post. "Nothing solid," Watson admitted, mopping his brow. "Word is Thornton's crew is laying low. But I did get a more detailed description of him from a marshal up in Telluride. Said Thornton has a jagged scar just over his right eye like an old knife wound. And he favors a Colt Peacemaker with silver inlay on the grip. Sound familiar?" Bo's blood ran cold. "That's him," he said, his voice tight. "That's the man who took Mary's locket." The image of the outlaw was burned into his memory, the cold blue eyes, the precise movements, and the glint of that unique pistol. "Figured as much," Watson said, sighing. "Well, if he's smart, he's halfway to Mexico by now. But men like that, they aren't usually smart. They're arrogant. He'll surface again." The sheriff's visit left Bo with a renewed sense of unease. The threat he'd tried to push to the back of his mind was real, with a name and a face. Jedediah Thornton. He felt a primal need to protect the fragile home he and Clara were building, a sanctuary that felt more vulnerable than ever. The threat wasn't just from outlaws. It came in gingham dresses and judging eyes. The women of Mercy's Bend, led by the formidable Mrs. Patterson, had made their disapproval of Bo's arrangement with Clara clear. They whispered in the aisles of Morrison's store and cast disapproving glances when Clara came to town for supplies. One Sunday, Mrs. Patterson and the minister's wife made a formal call to the ranch. They sat stiffly in the parlor. Clara had worked so hard to make welcoming their teacups untouched. "Mr. Hartley," Mrs. Patterson began, her voice dripping with false concern, "we have come to speak on a matter of moral delicacy. The town is talking." "The town always talks," Bo said flatly. "But they are talking about the propriety of having an unmarried woman living under your roof," the minister's wife added. "It sets a poor example for the children." "Miss Clara has been nothing but a godsend to my children," Bo countered, his temper rising. "She is a woman of unimpeachable character." Perhaps Mrs. Patterson conceded. "But appearances matter. People are saying she has set her cap for you, that she is using your grief to trap you. For the good of your family's reputation, you must send her away." Clara, who had been serving them cookies, stood frozen in the doorway. Bo saw the flicker of pain in her eyes before she masked it with a calm, neutral expression. "Thank you for your concern, ladies," Bo said, standing up to signal the end of the visit. "But how I run my home and care for my children is my business." Clara stays. After they left, a tense silence filled the house. That night on the porch, the comfortable quiet was gone, replaced by a new strain. "They were right, you know," Clara said softly, staring out into the darkness. "You should send me away. The gossip will only hurt the children in the long run." "No," Bo said, his voice more forceful than he intended. He moved his chair closer to hers. "I won't let them chase you away. This is your home now, too." "Is it?" she whispered, her voice filled with a familiar, heartbreaking resignation. "I am your housekeeper, Bo. That's all." He reached out his calloused hand, covering hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. Her skin was soft, her hand trembling slightly at his touch. "Is that all you want it to be?" She didn't answer, but she didn't pull her hand away. In the charged silence, under the watchful eyes of the stars, Bo knew that the sanctuary he was trying to build was under siege from all sides, from the gossip in town and the unnamed outlaw in the mountains. And he knew with a certainty that terrified and thrilled him that he would fight to the death to protect it and the woman sitting beside him. The late summer heat had settled over the valleys, shimmering above the fields and turning the dust on the road to a fine powder. A fragile domesticity had taken hold at the Double H, a rhythm of shared work and quiet companionship. Bo found himself looking for reasons to be near the house during the day, just to catch a glimpse of Clara in the garden, her face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat, or to hear her humming softly in the kitchen. He was falling in love, a slow, terrifying, and undeniable process. He was planning to speak to her, to lay his feelings bare, and ask her to make their arrangement permanent, to become his wife. In truth, he was rehearsing the words in his mind as he repaired a broken corral gate when he saw the rider approaching. The man rode with an easy, arrogant confidence, his horse a fine-looking bay. He was tall and lean, dressed in clothes that were a little too fine for a working man. As he drew closer, Bo felt a prickle of unease. There was something familiar about him. The rider dismounted at the house, not waiting for an invitation. The front doors opened, and Clara stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Bo saw her freeze, her body going rigid. The smile on her face dissolved into a mask of pure shock and terror. The man smiled, a slow, predatory spreading of his lips. "Hello, Clara May," he said, his voice carrying in the still air. "You've led me quite a chase." Bo dropped his hammer and started walking toward the house, his mind racing. He knew this man, the confident posture, the way he held himself. Bo's eyes were drawn to the man's face, and he saw a jagged white scar cutting through his right eyebrow. At that moment, the man turned his head slightly, and the sun glinted off the handle of the pistol holstered at his hip, a silver-inlaid grip. It was him. Jedediah Thornton, the man from the stagecoach, the man who had stolen Mary's locket. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The two separate threats to his world, the outlaw in the mountains and the shadows of Clara's past, had just converged on his front porch. "What are you doing here?" Clara's voice was a strained whisper. "What do you think I've come for, my wife?" Thornton said, his gaze sweeping over the ranch with an appraising air. He looked at Bo, who was now only a few yards away, and a flicker of recognition, followed by cold amusement, lit his pale blue eyes. "Well, well. Looks like my wandering bride has landed on her feet. Found herself a new protector." Bo stopped, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The rage that had been simmering for months boiled over. "You're the man from the stagecoach," he said, his voice a low growl. Thornton's smile widened. Small world, isn't it, rancher? You've got something of mine. He patted the pocket of his coat where he'd placed the locket. And it seems you've got something else of mine, too. Clara is not your property, Bo said, stepping between him and the porch. That's where you're wrong. Thornton said, his amusement fading into something harder. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded yellowed document. Marriage certificate. Signed and sealed in Denver 5 years ago. This woman belongs to me by law, and I've come to collect. The paper was a death sentence to the fragile life they had built. Bo looked from the certificate in Thornton's hand to Clara's pale, terrified face. The man who had violated his past was now here to destroy his future. He was a thief, a monster, and according to the law, he was Clara's husband. She told me you were dead, Bo said, his mind reeling. A convenient fantasy, Thornton scoffed. Now I can see you've gotten attached. I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to discuss a settlement for my troubles, for the alienation of my wife's affections. His eyes glittered with greed. But make no mistake, one way or another, I'm leaving with what's mine. The standoff was absolute. Bo was caught in an impossible trap. To protect Clara, he would have to deal with the very man he had sworn to see hang. And Thornton, the cold-eyed outlaw, held all the cards a legal document, a stolen piece of Bo's heart, and a history of violence that was written all over Clara's terrified face. The sanctuary of the Double H had been breached, and a monster was standing on his porch. Jed Thornton did not press his claim with violence. That would have been too simple, too clean. Instead, he retreated to Mercy's Bend and began a campaign of psychological warfare using the law and the town's appetite for gossip as his weapons. He was a far more cunning villain than Bo had anticipated. He took a room at Fletcher's Hotel, playing the part of the wronged husband to perfection. He spoke in hushed, sorrowful tones in the saloon about his flighty wife, a good woman at heart, but easily led astray. He hinted at the trauma that had kept him from searching for her sooner, spinning a tale of injury and hardship that elicited sympathy from the town's less discerning citizens. Then came the legal maneuvering. He filed a formal complaint with Judge Carter accusing Bo of alienation of affection and Clara of theft of the money she had taken when she fled. He used his intimate knowledge of Clara's past, twisting her inability to have children from a private sorrow into a public shame, whispering that it made her unstable, desperate, and prone to hysterics. The poison seeped into the town's bloodstream, and the tide of public opinion, which had been slowly turning in Clara's favor, began to recede. The true terror, however, came in quieter, more personal forms. One morning, Clara went to the porch to find a dead rattlesnake coiled neatly on the welcome mat. There was no way to prove who had left it, but the message was clear. Another afternoon, while the children were playing in the yard, Bo saw Thornton on the ridge overlooking the ranch, just a silhouette against the sky watching. He stayed for nearly an hour, a silent, menacing presence, before melting back into the trees. He was marking his territory, reminding them that he was always there, just out of reach. The strain began to wear on them all. The children were forbidden from straying far from the house. Samuel grew quiet and watchful, again his brief, happy childhood receding. Clara became skittish, jumping at every unexpected sound. The easy comfort on the porch at night was replaced by tense, whispered conversations about lawyers and legal options. The ranch, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. "He's trying to break us," Bo said one evening, watching Clara stare out into the encroaching darkness. "He wants to wear us down until you have no choice but to go with him, or I have no choice but to pay him off." "He will never break me again." Clara said, her voice a thin, brittle thread. "But I can't let him hurt you or the children. Maybe I should just go." Never, Bo said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. We fight this, together. The hearing was set for a Saturday. The town was buzzing. It was no longer a simple legal matter. It was the best drama Mercy's Bend had seen in years. Bo felt like an animal in a trap, forced to defend his home, and the woman he loved in a court of public opinion, presided over by a man who held a legal claim to her. The night before the hearing, a storm rolled in the sky, turning a bruised purple gray. The wind howled around the house and rain lashed against the windows. It felt like the world was reflecting the turmoil in their hearts. I'm scared, Bo, Clara admitted, her voice small in the dark of their room. I know, he said, holding her tighter. But tomorrow you tell your truth, and I'll tell mine. That's all we can do. But Bo had a secret he hadn't shared with Clara. He had sent a telegram to the U.S. Marshal in Telluride, the one who had provided the description of Thornton. He had asked a single desperate question. He had received a reply just that afternoon. It was a long shot, a wild card he was saving for the moment he needed it most. He prayed that moment wouldn't come, but he knew Jed Thornton. It would. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to break in the Mercy's Bend town hall. The town hall was packed, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and morbid curiosity. Every whisper, every shifted footstep echoed in the tense silence. The storm that had raged all night had settled into a sullen gray drizzle, and the light filtering through the tall windows was dim and funereal. At the front of the room, Jed Thornton sat with a self-satisfied smirk, the picture of a wronged man seeking justice. The hearing began, and Judge Carter, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the burden of human folly, called on Clara to speak. She walked to the front, her back straight, her hands clasped to stop them from trembling. She spoke of the abuse, her voice quiet, but clear, her words painting a stark picture of her life with Jed. When she finished, Jed rose. He did not deny her claims directly. Instead, he twisted them with a venomous skill. My wife, as you can see, is a delicate creature, he said, his tone dripping with condescending pity. Prone to flights of fancy. She was always clumsy, tripping over her own feet. Those bruises, she speaks of unfortunate accidents. A fall down the stairs, a run-in with a door frame. Her injuries are from her own flighty and clumsy nature, not from my hand. I tried to protect her from herself, but she sees cruelty in my every concern. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara's testimony, so powerful and raw, was now reframed as the hysteria of a foolish woman. Public opinion, which had swayed toward her, was now hopelessly divided. Bo felt a surge of white-hot rage. Just as the hearing seemed to be swinging in Jed's favor, Bo stood up. Your Honor, I have a question for Mr. Thornton. Judge Carter nodded. Bo turned to face his adversary. Mr. Thornton, 3 months ago, the Durango stagecoach was robbed just outside of town. Were you involved in that crime? The room erupted in whispers. Jed laughed a short, ugly bark. That's absurd. What does that have to do with my wife? The leader of that gang carried a silver-inlaid pistol. Bo continued, his voice ringing with authority. Just like the one you carry. And he stole something from me. A silver locket. Bo's gaze locked with Jed's. A locket that belonged to my late wife, Mary Hartley. At the mention of Mary's name, Jed's composure finally cracked. A spasm of raw, unfiltered emotion crossed his face, not guilt, but a deep, festering anger. You have no right to speak her name. Jed snarled, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. Why not? Bo pressed, sensing he had struck a nerve. What was Mary Hartley to you? The room fell silent. Jed's handsome face was contorted into a mask of pure hatred. He was exposed, his carefully constructed persona stripped away. "She was my sister," he spat, the words dropping like stones into the stunned silence. "My younger sister, Mary Thornton." Chaos. The revelation was a lightning strike, connecting every disparate piece of the puzzle. "You blame me for her death," Bo said, the realization dawning on him. "You killed her." Jed roared, all pretense gone. He pointed a trembling finger at Bo. "You dragged her out to this godforsaken rock pile, worked her into an early grave with your ambition and your precious ranch. She was fragile. She wasn't meant for this life. You broke her, and you let her die." The true motive was finally revealed, stark and terrible in its twisted logic. The robbery. It was never about the money, was it? Bo asked quietly. It was about what was mine. Jed's eyes were wild. That locket was a Thornton family heirloom. My mother gave it to Mary. It didn't belong in the dirt with her. It didn't belong to you. His pursuit of Clara, his psychological torment, it was all an act of twisted, elaborate revenge. It was never about getting Clara back. It was about destroying the new life Bo was trying to build, taking away the woman who was healing the family Jed believed Bo had destroyed. Exposed and cornered, Jed's predator instincts took over. In one fluid motion, he drew his silver-inlaid pistol. The crowd screamed and scrambled back. He grabbed the nearest person, Tom Morrison, the portly store owner, and hauled him forward, pressing the gun to his temple. "Nobody moves," Jed screamed, backing toward the door, dragging his terrified hostage with him. The climax had shifted from a legal battle to a life-and-death standoff. The storm outside chose that moment to break again, a clap of thunder rattling the building as rain sluiced down the windows, plunging the room into a deeper gloom. Sheriff Watson drew his weapon. "Let him go, Thornton. It's over." "It's over when I say it is," Jed retorted, his eyes darting around the room, wild and desperate. Bo held up a hand to the sheriff. He saw the path Jed was taking toward the side door. He also saw the heavy oak lectern standing near that path. This couldn't be solved with a gun. That would be vengeance, the same poison that fueled Jed. This had to be about justice. Jed Bo said, his voice calm and steady, drawing the outlaw's attention. "You're right. I miss her too. Every single day." The unexpected words seemed to momentarily confuse Jed. His grip on Morrison slackened almost imperceptibly. It was the only opening Bo needed. With a powerful shove, he sent the heavy lectern toppling over. It crashed to the floor directly in Jed's path. Thrown off balance, Jed stumbled. Morrison scrambled free. In that split second of chaos, Sheriff Watson lunged, and Bo was right behind him. The fight was brief and brutal. The silver pistol clattered to the floor. The sound of the sheriff's handcuffs clicking shut was the final definitive end to Jed Thornton's reign of terror. As they hauled him to his feet, a defeated, broken man, his hateful gaze found Bo. But Bo wasn't looking at him. He was looking at Clara, who was standing pale, but resolute, finally truly free. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, both literal and figurative, a sense of profound relief settled over Mercy's Bend. With Jed Thornton securely locked in the town jail, awaiting transfer to a federal marshal, the community began the slow process of atonement. The first to arrive at the Double H was Mrs. Patterson. She came alone, her usual imperious demeanor replaced by a humbling shame. She stood on the porch, twisting a handkerchief in her hands, and offered a stiff but sincere apology to Clara. "I was wrong," she said, not quite meeting Clara's eyes. "I listened to gossip when I should have listened to my heart. You are a good woman, Mrs. Hartley, and this family is lucky to have you." It was the first of many such visits. The townspeople confronted with the stark reality of Jed's evil, and Clara's courage sought to make amends. Sacks of flour jars of preserves and offers of help with the ranch work appeared on their doorstep. The social siege was over. A few days later, Sheriff Watson rode out his expression far lighter than it had been in months. He dismounted and held something out to Bo. It was the silver locket. "Found it in his coat pocket," the sheriff said. "Figured this belongs to you." Bo took the locket, its cool weight familiar in his palm. He snapped it open. Mary's face smiled up at him, her painted eyes full of the life and love he remembered so well. He closed it, the click sounding like a door shutting on a painful chapter. That evening, after the children were asleep, Bo found Clara on the porch. He sat beside her and placed the locket in her hand. He told the whole story to the marshal. Bo said quietly, "Mary ran away from home to marry me. Her family disapproved. Jed was her older brother, always possessive. He never forgave her. Or me." Clara traced the intricate engraving on the locket. "So our pasts were connected all along," she murmured. "Tangled together by one broken family. Both of us were haunted by a Thornton. It seems we were." Bo agreed. He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "He wanted to destroy everything I loved because he thought I destroyed his sister. And he used you to do it. But he didn't win," Clara said, looking up at him, her eyes clear and strong in the moonlight. "He brought us together. His hate was the strange, dark soil our love grew from." She was right. The revelation of their shared tragic connection didn't divide them. It forged a new, deeper bond between them. They were both survivors of Jedediah Thornton's destructive influence, brought together by the very chaos he had created to tear them apart. The house behind them was quiet and safe. The valley below was peaceful. The ghosts of the past had been confronted, and if not vanquished, at least understood. They were no longer just two wounded people finding solace in one another. They were partners, their lives and histories now inextricably, meaningfully intertwined. Autumn arrived, setting the aspens on the surrounding hills ablaze with gold and crimson. The crisp air held the promise of a new season, a fresh start. On a bright Sunday afternoon, a small group gathered in the parlor of the ranch house. Judge Carter, looking far more benevolent than he did in his courtroom, stood before the fireplace, a leather-bound book in his hand. It was not a wedding, but a creation. Bo and Clara stood together with Samuel, Lucy, and Thomas between them, and their hands all linked in an unbroken chain. Today, Clara was formally adopting the children. The papers had been filed, the legalities observed. This ceremony was for them a public and heartfelt declaration that their makeshift arrangement had become a true and permanent family. "Do you, Clara May Hartley," the judge asked, his voice, "gentle take Samuel, Lucy, and Thomas to be your own beloved children, to love, honor, and protect from this day forward?" Clara knelt, bringing herself to eye level with the children. Tears streamed down her face, but her smile was radiant. "I do," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "With all my heart, I do." "And do you, children?" The judge continued, smiling. "Accept this woman as your mother, to be part of your lives and your hearts forever?" "Yes," Thomas shouted, throwing his arms around Clara's neck. Lucy and Samuel followed, enveloping her in a tangle of loving arms. The small crowd of friends, Sheriff Watson, Tom Morrison, even a tearful Mrs. Patterson applauded. Bo placed his hands on the huddle of his family, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. Later, after the cake had been eaten and their friends had departed, Bo took Clara and the children by the hand. "There's one last thing we need to do," he said. He led them to the small fenced-off family plot on a hill overlooking the ranch. A simple wooden cross marked Mary's grave. The children grew quiet, their celebratory mood softening into a gentle reverence. Bo sat them down in the soft grass. He didn't speak of sadness or loss. Instead, he told them stories of their mother, of her laughter, which he said sounded like wind chimes, of her kindness to stray animals, of the way she loved to dance in the kitchen while she cooked. He gave them back the best parts of her, ensuring her memory was a blessing, not a burden. When he was done, he pulled the silver locket from his pocket. He held it out for the children to see one last time. "Your mother loved this," he said softly. "It came from her family. But her family, it was a source of pain for her and for us. And now she has a new family watching over her." He looked at Clara, a silent question in his eyes. She understood immediately and nodded, placing her hand over his. Together, they walked to the head of the grave. Bo dug a small hole in the soft earth beside the cross. He looked at the locket one final time, then placed it gently in the ground. "Goodbye, Mary," he whispered. He and Clara covered it with earth together. It was an act of letting go of, burying the pain, the tragedy, and the revenge that had haunted them all. It was a closing of a chapter, a final peaceful farewell, not just to Mary, but to the ghosts of the past. Bo stood and pulled Clara to her feet. He took her hand, and she took Samuel's, who took Lucy's, who took Thomas's. A new chain, stronger than silver. They stood for a moment, a complete family looking out at the ranch, their home, their future. Then together, they turned and walked away from the grave, hand in hand toward the setting sun.